SRIRAM's IAS, serving the nation since 1985. Ab offline ho ya online, we are the lifeline.
Hello student, welcome to SRIRAM's IAS. Welcome to this current affair class. This is class number 25 and I am Mayank Bharadwaj presenting you this class. So the news is very important and news is about Kunal Kamra. The news is about freedom of speech in India. Now satirical comedy, defamation, these are very big things which are becoming popular day after day. Okay, the defamation thing which you keep finding in the papers, newspapers here and there, and along with it, you also know that it's a reasonable restriction on the freedom of speech and expression. On the other hand, you also find the term satirical comedy, which is becoming very famous in India nowadays. So comedians come up and they take a jibe at the politicians, they take a jibe at the rich people. Satirical comedy, it's a very good kind of comedy, but how it is taken, is it accepted by the society or not, is it accepted by the political establishment or not, that is something to be seen. Now Kunal Kamra is one comedian who in his comedy show has said something about one of the prime politicians of Maharashtra, and because of this the controversy has started. Charges of defamation, criminal defamation have been made against Kunal Kamra, and now the debate of freedom of speech and expression versus the political actions or the criminal sectional impositions on those people who are doing satirical comedy have been imposed. So let's dive deep into this topic. So recent controversy involving comedians' remark, debate over limits of free speech and defamation law in India. Now, if you see, in one or the other way, we can say that the grounds, the reasonable restrictions, all these are vague terms. What is defamation is not explained, or what is defamation is not codified anywhere. There are no contours in which you can keep these things. One thing can become a defamation according to one person, but it may not be a defamation according to other person. And so much is the diversity of the country, so much is the mental space of the people in this country, that one person is saying something is tolerable to the other person, but the same thing may not be tolerable to the third person. So because of this, all these controversies happen. Everybody is free to go to the police and file a criminal complaint against someone who has been doing satirical comedy in this country, or even for that matter, forget about the comedians doing satirical comedy. Most of the time, even normal common people posting something on their social media accounts becomes a problem. We all know about the Shreya Singhal case where 66A of the IT Act, this particular section was declared unconstitutional and void by the Supreme Court. There are other controversies also. Asim Trivedi controversy happened. He was a cartoonist. He used to make very appealing cartoons but satirical in nature. Similarly, Kunal Kamra, again satirical comedy on politicians, satirical political comedy. So all this becomes a problem. So what is the solution to all this? There is no solution. The only solution is that we try to accept these kind of comedy as comedy only. This is not a failure mechanism of the state, neither it is creating any kind of law and order problem, nor it is trying to diminish somebody's reputation. But again, reasonable restrictions are made in order to limit the unnecessary use of freedom of expression, even when it is not needed. We cannot give free hand to anybody to speak anything about a person, and that is the reason why there is always a fight between the freedom of speech and expression on one hand and the reasonable restrictions on the other hand. And because things are not very much codified and defined, and these are the things which in a way becomes more elaborate with the changing times. Their definition changes with the changing time. So again, it's an interpretational problem, it's a subjective matter. Moving forward, Article 19(1)(a), everybody knows this article provides freedom to all the citizens of the country to freedom of speech and freedom of expression. Expression can be of many types. Cartoonist also expresses. It is not only through speech that you express, it can be through a book, through a poem, it can be through a post written on Facebook or Instagram, through a movie made, or a short ad created, or a short movie, or a play, or a nukkad natak. All these are the forms of expression. Even for that matter, the sign language is also a form of expression, and it is very natural and normal to human beings to express themselves. If this one particular right is controlled by the state, or the people are stopped from expressing themselves, then there is no meaning of all the other rights, because you have taken away their liberty. This time it's not the physical liberty of the person where you put somebody into a jail, but it is about the mental liberty, the freedom to express themselves. And human beings express themselves in so many ways. So it's a very important article. You all must understand this. It guarantees the right to free speech and expression. Clause number 2 of Article 19 lists several reasonable restrictions. So your freedom of speech and expression must not at any cost hurt the sovereignty and integrity of the country, neither the security nor the public order. Your freedom of speech and expression must not be obscene in nature. It has to be according to the morality, the ethical standards of the society. It has to be a reflection of decency. It cannot be obscene. So this is another reasonable restriction on freedom of speech and expression. Contempt of court, it should not be criminal contempt or civil contempt. There shall not be any kind of contempt of court or the contempt of parliament in your freedom of speech and expression. You can speak about the truth. You can give constructive criticism. But it should not be contempt in the manner to, a way of bringing down the image of the court, or anything which is said or written or expressed in such a way which tries to diminish the authority of the court or the criminal justice system. And at last, defamation. Speaking or expressing anything which brings down the image of a person is called defamation. In a very simple language and lucid language, defamation is this: that through words, through language spoken or written, through cartoons made, or through poems written, through movies, through sign language, through whatever means of expression are there, if you try to tear up the image of a person in such a way that that's not replaceable, that's not, that image cannot be brought back for years and years, people will talk about him in that sense. You change the whole character of a person in the eyes of the public by saying something. Now that is called defamation. There can be criminal defamation and civil defamation. Criminal defamation is a crime under section 499 and section 500 of the Indian Penal Code. Civil defamation is also there. The punishment is monetary, but when it is a crime under IPC, the criminal contempt, the criminal defamation, there is also a penal punishment on that. So moving forward, one more thing I would like to tell here, that sometimes your work is criticized by people. Sometimes there is dissent, and in both these situations, the person who is expressing comes under fire. But criticism or dissent, these are not the two things which are reasonable grounds. And any material which you have produced, which has been criticized widely, or people dissent and do not agree with it, so it cannot be struck down by the courts, it cannot be brought down by the government. Why? Because these are not the reasonable grounds. Criticisms can be many and criticisms are allowed, but if criticism is there and that becomes the ground of blocking somebody's freedom of speech and expression, that's not the case with judiciary. sort of accepts. This happened in the recent case of Pratap Gadi, one of the member of parliament of Congress from Gujarat in Rajya Sabha. A FIR was launched against him because the poem which he posted on his Instagram account was criticized widely. So court said that criticism to a piece of art is not the ground on which you can bring it down or block it. That's not a ground on which you can hinder somebody's freedom of speech and expression. So this is an important point which you should remember. The speech and expression has to be hindered only by reasonable restrictions. These must be reasonable in nature. If it is defamation, it has to be proved in the court. If it is contempt, it has to be proved. If some material is against decency, then it has to be proved. Sometimes people speak several words and those are socially acceptable. किसी मूवी में या किसी वेब सीरीज में आपने देखा होगा एक कैरेक्टर दूसरे कैरेक्टर को गाली दे देता है. Now that's not obscenity. That is not obscenity, and that material is acceptable in the society. So you cannot put it in the definition of decency and morality and then say that this material is trying to bring down the decency and the morality standards of the society and hence the material must be banned. No, that's not the case. So you should understand all these things needs to be proved. Criticism, dissent, those are not the grounds. So ambiguity in legal provision, lack of clear definition of reasonable restriction, that's one of the major problem why these things happen, and this will keep happening because there cannot be a clear-cut definition of reasonable restriction. How can there be? Times are changing, society is changing, value system is changing, and for that reason a man or a woman, they are trying to push their limits, mental limits, toleration limits. The kind of satirical comedy which is going on now, maybe that was not acceptable 60 years back, or maybe it was acceptable 60 years back and society has become more intolerant now. So society changes, so there cannot be a fixed definition of reasonable restriction. This leads to subjective interpretation and selective enforcement. So an issue. So civil defamation, criminal defamation, we have already seen section 499, section 500 of IPC, this is criminal defamation. Moving on, defenses against defamation. So if you speak the truth, if it is a fair criticism, then it's okay. But it has to be reasonable. Your truth, if it is trying to hurt the public order, security, sovereignty and unity of India, you must control your truth. You must keep it to yourself. Those are the things which actually limits you and limits your right of freedom of speech and expression. So free speeches versus defamation, constitutional conflicts. We have already seen. This is the problem. This defines in a way reasonable restrictions are not defines but listed. Okay, and here freedom is given. So freedom versus reasonable restrictions which are not codified, which are not defined, which changes with time and which is sort of vague. So key question is, where does free speech and defamation begin and where does it end? That's the whole point. Some people may be thinking that Kunal Kamra has done nothing wrong, but some people may be thinking that whatever he spoke was a clear-cut case of defamation. And it is only upon the courts to understand, and courts take a very broad view and a very, very broad judgment on these things. There are several cases which are very important for us to understand from the examination point of view. Rajgopal versus State of Tamil Nadu in 1994, court talked about right to privacy. So there was this one important documentary which was not documentary but an autobiography which was written, and in autobiography some personal events of a person's life was also written. So court said that right to privacy is a very important right under Article 21, and for that reason somebody's autobiography, if it contains the very private information of about a person's life, or a very private event about a person's life, and if a person doesn't want it to be there, then it should be removed. A person has all the right to approach the court. The person who is writing the autobiography cannot claim that it is his right of freedom of speech and expression to write anything he wants in the book about another person. Okay, it's an important thing which you should understand. Every individual has a right to be left alone, and so they have a right to try safeguard their and their family's privacy. Very important judgment. Another one, Shreya Singhal case, we all know section 66A of the IT Act was struck down as unconstitutional by the court. 69A, this is the one of the IT Act which is in news and which is in use nowadays, of the IT Act. Yeah. Subramaniam Swamy versus Union of India 2016 case. It upheld the criminal defamation as constitutional. Okay. Right to reputation is part of Article 21. So you have a reputation to maintain, and that reputation is a very important reputation because it sort of defines everything you are. It defines your character and it defines how other people sees you. Okay, so you have this right to feel dignified in the eyes of others, and that is the reason why court specifically is stating that criminal defamation, if it is there, okay, then it will be struck down by court under section 499 and under section 500 of the Indian Penal Code. So these are very important judgments which are trying to broaden the idea of freedom of expression, which are trying to broaden the idea and the contours of how people can express, interpreting freedom of expression in the widest manner it can, thanks to the courts who are trying to hold to this freedom of speech and expression and the idea of making society more vocal about their political alignments, about their economic and social alignments. And this is how a society and a polity works. So thank you very much for joining me in this lecture, and then next time we are going to come up with the next important topic of current affairs. Till then, bye bye, have a nice day, and Jai Hind.